In the heart of the night, this world were bright, we will set it alight. In the heart of the night, in the heart of the night, this world will burn bright, we will set it alight. In the heart of the night. Hello everyone, I'm Anthropomantic Fiend, and I do horror-related things on the internet. And today I am reviewing The Vampire Lovers. This is a movie that I have definitely talked about before. I actually did a whole live stream watching this movie with friends back in October. It is the most viewed video on my channel right now, and as far as I can tell, it is the most viewed video on my channel for all the wrong reasons. This movie came out in 1970. It is a Hammer production, and it was directed by Roy Ward Baker. Roy Ward Baker directed a fair share of Hammer films, including Dr. Jekyll and Sister Hyde and Scars of Dracula, and also directed the Amicus anthology movie The Vault of Horror, among many other things. And this film stars the amazing Ingrid Pitt, who was also in Hammer's Countess Dracula, the Amicus film The House That Dripped Blood, and the original Wicker Man. She also voiced Countess Bathory on this album, Cruelty and the Beast from Cradle of Filth, which I think is wonderful because although she plays Countess Bathory in Countess Dracula, her voice was overdubbed with this posh British accent, which makes no sense whatsoever, given that she's got this wonderful accent of her own that fits the Bathory character perfectly. I'm glad she got the chance to actually voice the character on this album. But if you are a fan of Ingrid Pitt's work, if you're a fan of true crime and messed up history and the true Countess Bathory story, and you are cool with extreme metal and screechy vocals, I highly, highly recommend this album. It's really good. But getting back to The Vampire Lovers, it also stars the legendary Peter Cushing, who is of course known for playing Van Helsing in the Hammer Dracula series, Dr. Frankenstein or Baron Frankenstein in the Hammer Frankenstein series, and appearing in Star Wars A New Hope, among many, many other things. Madeline Smith, who was also in Hammer's Frankenstein and the Monster from Hell, Hammer's Taste the Blood of Dracula, and Theater of Blood with Vincent Price, which is a great movie. And this film stars George Cole, who was in Fright, Mary Riley, and the 1951 Alistair Sim Scrooge. This is based on J. Sheridan Le Fanu's classic Gothic novella Carmilla, which is a personal favorite of mine. I read the whole thing on my YouTube channel. If you're new here, hi, my name is Anthro. I am a Carmilla addict. I have a problem. If you're not familiar with the story of Carmilla and the story of this film, this follows Emma Morton, who is kind of lonely, wants a friend or some form of companionship. Lo and behold, a carriage crashes on her property. Within the carriage is this countess who is rushing because one of her family members is dying and she wants to see him before he dies. With her is her daughter Carmilla. Mr. Morton offers to take Carmilla in and take care of her while the Countess goes about her business. Emma and Carmilla start growing much closer to each other during Carmilla's stay. Unbeknownst to her and to Mr. Morton, Carmilla is a vampire who previously went under the name Marcella and has already seduced and killed Emma's friend Laura, and she is presumably here to continue feeding. So the score for this film was done by Harry Robertson, who often went under the name Harry Robinson. I don't know why, it's really not that different. But he also did the scores for the other two films in Hammer's Karnstein trilogy, Lust for a Vampire and Twins of Evil, along with The Oblong Box, Countess Dracula, and fright. And his score for this film is very bombastic in classic gothic horror fashion, very similar to what we hear in a lot of other Hammer movies and even the earlier stuff done by Universal. But it also has these passages that are very kind of sweeping and lush and romantic, which is a thing in other gothic horror scores of the period and before this, but it's kind of placed a little bit differently in this, because like when Carmilla is seducing Emma, it's not sinister the way it would definitely be in other films where it's like, oh no, we know something that the characters don't, Carmilla's gonna kill these people. It's played very romantically, at least as far as the score goes, and I really liked that. Story-wise, this is probably the most narratively faithful version of the book on screen. It really hits most of the beats that are in the book. Slightly changed, but mostly similar. The carriage crash, so many of the little moments between Carmilla and Emma. More on the Emma character's name in a little bit, but her interactions with Carmilla, Carmilla's personality around her, the whole lore of Carmilla and her mom, the previous family that was attacked, and General Spielsdorf, all of that is in the book and basically plays out the way it does in the film. Even to the point of losing Emma's perspective at some point and shifting over to this perspective of a bunch of boring old guys, basically, at the end, which I'm not crazy about. The whole novella is from Laura's perspective. Again, getting into names in a little bit. Partway through, General Spielsdorf and some other people kind of barge in, and suddenly it's this vampire hunts that's basically narrated in third person, and it's like, where the hell did Laura's perspective go in all of this? And then she like jumps back in at the end. And that's basically what happens here. That's no offense to Peter Cushing or George Cole or the guy who plays Baron Hartog. I am forgetting his name, but all of them are good actors. I'm just more interested in the Emma Carmilla stuff and that perspective. This film also takes the stuff that was basically flashback that General Spielsdorf and these other people just related while Carmilla was there and makes them into an earlier prologue where we actually see them and their families and Carmilla being there, or Marcilla rather. I'm not sure if I like that or not. It works fine in the context of this because it's not this super subjective, this is from Emma's perspective thing. As a matter of fact, it kind of hinges on us knowing more than Emma does. I think it works really well in the first act because it is setting up the little con that Carmilla and her mom and the man in black are constantly pulling on these different families for her to find fresh blood. When we get to the discussion between Spielsdorf and Mr. Morton and Baron Hartog towards the end, and it's just them vampire hunting, it's not that exciting to me. Mostly I'm just sad because I don't want Carmilla to die. This is 70s Hammer. They're trying to draw in audiences with something that's a little bit edgier, a little bit more exploitative than they've been before, and so there is nudity in the film on the parts of Ingrid Pitt and Madeline Smith. It's not intrusive, I don't think. It's not just my personal pet peeve of the random sex scene. It is, oh, Carmilla's taking a bath. Oh, Emma's trying on a dress now. And it's unnecessary nudity, but it's not intrusive to the story. That said, even though I'm more focused on the characters and what they're doing, and it doesn't really feel like, oh, this isn't a performance anymore, it's objectifying the person or whatever, it clearly is meant to be objectifying them a little bit. And Madeline Smith even said, I don't want to do the nude scenes, and either the director or the producers or somebody else involved with the film were like, no, it's fine, these nude scenes will only be in the Japan release of the film, and nobody you know is ever going to see this. And they were just flat out lying, which pisses me off. That is just really, really shitty. But it doesn't really turn the characters into sex objects, at least not in my eyes. They're still giving really strong performances. That said, as I'm going to get into, that really kind of ups the kind of erotic nature of everything, which really kind of emphasizes the lesbian undertones, overtones. It's really just there in the movie. It's not subtext aspect of the relationship between Emma and Carmilla, and I have a rant about that really has nothing to do with the quality of the film, but I'm going to get into that a little bit later. As far as the vampire lore in this movie goes, it predates the likes of Dracula and the film adaptations of Dracula that brought in these really hard and fast rules of daylight kills vampires and things of that nature. Those are things that Hammer were obviously familiar with and really emphasized in their run of Dracula movies, but I'm glad that they didn't kind of shoehorn that into their Carmilla adaptation here. They do bring some things into the story that weren't really part of Carmilla's original vampire lore. There's the use of garlic flowers and crucifixes and the old stake through the heart. I don't remember if that's a thing in the book or not, but they let her walk around in daylight, which is really important for key scenes in the story. So I'm glad that they didn't change the vampire lore just to conform with what they had done before. But again, there are those few elements of vampire lore that they have thrown in, and they've thrown in a few other kind of classic vampire and gothic horror film tropes that I think are really fun, notably the awkward tavern/inn scene where one character walks in, just orders a drink really casually, and then brings up vampires, and everybody's like dead silent, and they're like, yeah, you can't joke about that around here. Things are kind of messed up here. People are dying. That's in everything as far back as Nosferatu, going forward as far as An American Werewolf in London, and probably plenty of other films more recent than that. The other thing I really like about the story in this film is that it's very, very ambiguous, especially in terms of what Carmilla and the Karnstein family's actual motives are. There are these strange whisperings coming from the Karnstein castle and the Karnstein crypt that are just going, Mirkala. There's a particular shot where it just pans in on that, and we can hear those whisperings coming from the crypts. Mirkala is Carmilla's original actual given name. She just uses a lot of pseudonyms that are just anagrams of Mirkala. That's what Carmilla is. But she's standing out on the balcony and just listening to this voice, and she sounds really, really sad. And you can speculate that she's hearing the voices of the other members of the Karnstein clan that were killed by previous vampire hunters, and she's sad about that, or that she is kind of reluctant about all of the killing that she's doing, and she's just like, stop. I don't want to be a part of this anymore. Stop calling me back to this family. I don't want to be part of this family. That's just me reading things into it, but that's part of the fun of the original story and this movie. There are things that are left very ambiguous, and I really like speculating on them. As I said, this movie does end with the vampire hunters just coming in, staking Carmilla, and then cutting her head off. There was no way in hell in this movie that Carmilla was just going to be able to live any kind of happily ever after with Emma. That's just not happening in this movie, and Carmilla is probably actually meant to be evil and killing her. But the ending is just a huge bummer for me because it's just this procedural thing of these vampire hunters chasing Carmilla and then staking her. It feels like it kind of goes through the motions of what always happens. We know from the get-go that Carmilla just doesn't have a chance, and we're just like, well, that was depressing, and then she's dead, and the movie ends. It's fine, it doesn't bother me that much, but the ending always just kind of lets me down compared to the rest of the film. I find it really interesting that they bring in the portrait of Mirkala, which is a thing in the book. They find it pretty early on in the book, and the father of the Laura character is like, oh yeah, Laura, you found this portrait. It does look a lot like Carmilla. Wow. But he doesn't think anything of it. I like that they are actually a little bit smarter in this, and they actually do recognize that it's literally a picture of Carmilla. The other really interesting thing about the portrait in this is that when Carmilla is killed, the portrait itself, like, starts to decay and reveal this skull. It could just be artsy symbolism, but it also kind of feels like there might be a Portrait of Dorian Gray thing going on there, where Carmilla and the portrait are linked and it's keeping her alive. I'm probably completely talking out of my ass right now, but again, there's just little details about this movie that I like to read things into and to speculate about. That's one of my favorite things about this film. And one of my other favorite things about this film is just the visual style. It is very artificial, in the vein of a lot of Hammer's Gothic period pieces, but even more so at this point. I feel like there's a lot more period accuracy, or at least things that are a lot closer to period accuracy in some of their earlier Dracula films and Frankenstein films. In this, it feels like the budget is significantly lower. It is clearly people from the 70s doing their best kind of low budget, tacky version of Victorian era Gothic, but I kind of love it. The whole movie kind of feels like we're inside the set of some kind of stage play, except it's not just on a stage, it's kind of the whole world. From the kind of garish, a little bit over-the-top costuming, to the over-the-top performances, to the gorgeous matte painting backgrounds, it's all a little bit overwrought, a little bit artificial, but it is just really, really beautiful in its own great way. On the flip side of that, I also really love this film's use of nature, and by nature, I probably mean like the same woods that Hammer uses in every single one of their films. They had this wooded area in their backlot that they would shoot everything in. As far as I can tell, they probably shot their out in nature scenes there for this film, but I feel like those landscapes really, really complement what they did in this film better than they do in any of the other Hammer films I've seen, and it really transports me to kind of this other fictionalized version of Styria in a beautiful way. As far as character goes, here's my first big rant thing. In this movie, we've got Laura, who is Carmilla's first victim, and then Emma, who we spend most of the film with. However, in the book, I do not remember the name of Carmilla's first victim, but our main character is Laura. You've got the Laura Emma name change in this, you've got the Mina Lucy name change in Horror of Dracula and 10 million other Dracula movies, and you've got the Victor Henry name swap in the Universal Frankenstein movies. I don't understand what it is with classic Gothic horror adaptations and switching around people's names. It's confusing when you're trying to compare the source material to the original thing. It's unnecessary, and it just pisses me off. Stop doing it. I feel like adaptations have been a little better about that recently, but the production of Dracula that our local theater has been doing for years still does the Mina Lucy name swap, and just stop. Stop making it so hard to review things because you keep changing the names. It's hard for people to even know what character you're talking about anymore. As far as the Emma character goes in this, it could just be me having a personal preference for the Carmilla web series and Elise Bowman's portrayal of Laura in that, who is very plucky and spunky and self-reliant and very modernized. But Madeline Smith's portrayal of Emma in this is just very doe-eyed and innocent and super, super oblivious to everything, which is kind of the character in the book, but it just, I don't know, it frustrates me sometimes. I mostly just find it really funny, to be honest, which is no disrespect to Madeline Smith's performance. It is perfectly fine as far as acting goes. Just the way the character is written is just like, look, I have been very, very oblivious to when people have had a crush on me in the past before, but look at what is right in front of you. Carmilla is literally embracing you and saying, I love you, and I'm jealous of this guy you have a crush on, and I never want to leave you. And you're like, oh, we're just really good friends. I don't understand Emma. That could just be me preferring the kind of modern take on the Laura character, but even then, in the 70s in movies like The Blood-Spattered Bride, which is great. The Laura type character in that film has a lot more agency. I still feel for Emma in this film. I think she's a sympathetic and likable character. There's just not a lot to her, which again is kind of unfortunately what the character is in the book, but there's just not a lot there for me to latch on to, and I find it kind of frustrating. I also kind of feel bad that Peter Cushing doesn't have a meteor role in this film, because General Spielsdorf is a fine performance, but the character that he's given is nothing on the level of, say, Van Helsing or his completely amazingly deranged character in Twins of Evil, but it's fine. It's actually kind of nice to see these just really strong actors restraining themselves and playing background characters and just really adding to the film. The character of the man in black that we see earlier is a little bit frustrating to me because I kind of hate the implication that he is pulling the strings and he's the one who's kind of in charge of Carmilla and her mom and is making them go around and do stuff. It does kind of add a little bit more to Carmilla's character and her reluctance to be going around doing these things, but I personally like to think that it's either her or her mom or both of them that are in control of this operation, and he's really just the henchman, or all of them are kind of in cahoots together. As far as the ambiguous nature of their characters and me loving to read too much into everything, I kind of like to think of Twins of Evil as a prequel to this film because it really does have kind of an earlier time period setting. So I like to think that the Man in Black is actually Count Karnstein from Twins of Evil, but that's probably just me. Ingrid Pitt is just everything. Her performance is what makes this movie so great. She has this strength, but she's also very sensitive in certain scenes, and she's very animalistic and vicious, but she can also be really tragic, and kind of the tragedy that she brings to Carmilla is what makes the character work for me. Because with a lot of other vampires in other Hammer films, including in other installments in the Karnstein trilogy, like Twins of Evil, you shove a crucifix in that vampire's face, they're just gonna hiss at you and become very animalistic. Shove a crucifix in Carmilla's face, or have a funeral procession singing these hymns go past her, and she breaks down and she looks like she's on the verge of tears. You get the sense that there could be this guilt that she feels for her victims, that she hates being stuck in this existence where she has to feed on the people she cares about, or it could just be her being a really, really good actor and kind of putting on this human face so she can feed off people and drink their blood. It's completely open to interpretation, but she plays it so well that Carmilla could be a sympathetic character, but she could also just be playing the characters around her and playing the audience just to get what she wants, and I love that so much. That said, my big ranty thing that ties back into the sexed up nature of this film is I've listened to Ingrid Pitt talk about this film and the Carmilla novel, as well as the director Roy Ward Baker, and they read the book and they obviously both made this movie. They don't see anything that is remotely lesbian about the story, and that's kind of what the Carmilla story is. Granted, it's a little bit more vague, a little bit more subtextual in the original story, but given the more erotic nature of this film, and given the performance that Ingrid Pitt gives, where she clearly has this deep connection with Emma and literally, like, says, I love you, and I never want a man to take me away, I want to be with you forever, and Emma, being oblivious, is like, what? No, we're just friends, that's not the same thing. I don't see how they don't see that. Did you even watch the movie you made? I don't understand. I'm breaking down and not able to articulate this in words anymore, but the fact that the people who made this movie aren't seeing the subtext that literally isn't even subtext anymore in their own film kind of bothers me, but it doesn't take anything away from the film. I just wanted to rant. There aren't a huge amount of effects in this film, but they really add to the artificial beauty that's also present in the sets and the costumes. You've got some kind of dissolves where things will appear and disappear. You've got a few gore scenes, some decapitations, and these really simple fang applications that the vampires wear, and some little bite mark makeup that is on the breasts of the victims. These aren't neck-biting vampires, at least not when it comes to the female victims. All of it was clearly artificial, but it fit the aesthetic of the film, and it was really solid. All in all, I can talk about this film for days and days and days. I love this film. I don't know if it's going to be everyone's cup of tea, but I think it is one of Hammer's strongest films. It is my personal favorite Hammer movie, probably because I'm just a total and utter Carmilla geek, and I can watch this over and over again and find new things in it. But even if you're just a casual Hammer fan, or you want a great gothic vampire movie, or you're just a general horror fan, I would absolutely recommend seeking out this movie and watching it. I believe last time I checked it was on Shudder. I'm not sure anymore. I think it is available at least to rent on a few other streaming services. It is also available to buy on physical media. This is the Scream Factory Blu-ray release of the film, which I absolutely love. It's got a little mini documentary on the film itself. It's got a reading of a few passages of the original novella by Ingrid Pitt. There's a great commentary on the film. There are other releases of this film that aren't as fancy, that if you just want something cheap that you can watch the movie on, you can buy. But I highly, highly recommend getting the Scream Factory if you really want a nice version of this film. That is my review of The Vampire Lovers. Thank you for watching my video, and hopefully I will see you in another one. Bye!